Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Again, welcome in this meeting room today for our keynote speaker for this afternoon. At first, I would like to thank Echo 360, who is our sponsor of today's keynote sessions. By the way, they will be recording these kind of keynote sessions today and also tomorrow, and they will definitely welcome you visiting them at their booth in the hall outside of this meeting room. It's my true pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker this afternoon, Dr. Philip Long. I must say, I have a lot of respect. He's today here. He doesn't feel that well. He's suffering from a throat infection, so you will hear that when he starts talking, so his voice is a little bit more weak than it normally is. But he hopes to be able to complete the presentation today to you. Dr. Philip Long is a professor of Innovation and Educational Technology in the School of ITEE and the School of Psychology, and also the founding director of the Center for Educational Innovation and Technology at the University of Queensland. He's dedicated to research on learning environments that have the potential to innovate teaching, learning, and creativity. This includes research, development, and dissemination of educational innovation through the strategic use of physical and virtual space and technology for learning and research collaboration. The Centre fosters a community of scholarship among technology innovators and researchers within the University of Queensland, across Australasia, and around the world. His current research interests focus on designing build pedagogies, physical and virtual, to support active learning and collaboration. He retains a role as a visiting researcher in the Center for Educational Computing Initiatives at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where he was also the senior strategist for academic technologies. Interestingly, he's also a lapsed behavioral ecologist, having studied avian mating systems from the North Slope of Alaska to the coast of Patagonia. His area of research was the evolution of mating systems and the biological basis for cooperations. By the way, until today, I didn't know what an avian was, but I learned just a few minutes ago that it's a specific bird species living in South America. So today he will present on, is there a role for the LMS VLE in the emerging personal learning environment? Please join me in welcoming Dr. Phil Long.
Good afternoon. I'm going to depend on you all to indicate to me whether or not you can hear my voice and interpret the gravelly sounds. The throat thing will spare you from my karaoke rendition of Crowded House, but we will have to try to go through this talk. So let me give you a map of the talk. I hope to give you, after a little bit of an introduction about me, so you know who's speaking to you, some context, both about learners and particularly about emerging technologies as a way of framing the discussion about what the VLE or the LMS of the future needs to really contend with. And then ask the question what it is that VLEs do well, and whether that's enough, and what future possibilities lie in store. Okay? You with me? All right. So, who is this guy? Well, it's important because I'm not quite Gen X, obviously. Gen Xers expect to spend, tend to expend during their working life working in 10 to 15 different kinds of jobs. Millennials actually also intend or are predicted to have 10 to 15 different kinds of jobs, but spread across 4 to 6 different careers in the course of their working life. And I looked at that and think, well, maybe I'm sort of a canary in the mine shaft here. After a postdoc and 13 jobs and 3 different careers, including, as was mentioned, a lapsed biologist, medical informaticist, and technology planner, and various other things. I'm now here at UQ as a professor of innovation and digital learning, and that probably qualifies me as having professional ADD. But on the bottom, which you can't quite read there, says, what was that last tweet? But I think it's not dissimilar to the kind of working environment that your students are going to be experiencing as they go forward. So, I've got 175 slides. I will only use consonants from now on to speed things up. Now, I did this in Wales, and everybody looked at me like I was telling them exactly what they expected. So, tomorrow's students. Now, we've heard a lot about the characteristics of students and a lot of challenges to the notion of the so-called native digital immigrant. Mark Prensky's now passé, I think, monikers for these things. But the important characteristic here, I think, is that they are experiencing different kinds of technologies and exposures in different contexts. Not necessarily that they are well-versed in them or know how to use them in an academic context. So let's hear from some students briefly what they might be thinking.
When I'm a student, I want to have paper handouts. Why should teachers update to the technology we use anyway?
When I become a student, I want to be judged by my marks and not by the person I am.
When I become a student, I want my iPod and my mobile phone banned because they cannot be used as learning tools.
When I become a student, I want to stay at the desk all day, every day.
When I become a student, I want to blend in with the crowd and suppress my personality.
When I become a student, I want to be like everyone else and wear a uniform.
When I become a university student, I'm going to regurgitate all the information that I've learned at school.
And then the quote from Einstein about how we have strangled creativity in our current educational environment. Well, that was a little bit of tongue-in-cheek, but it's not that tongue-in-cheek to think about a student like Olivia, or androgynously Oliver, depending, who, imagine, is a high school student today, and by 2014, she's living in a world that is accessible at home, or through a technology, is accessible to the materials she uses for her education, both at home and in a classroom. She has digital objects commonly around her, from access to lab equipment, to fanzines, to textbooks. She focuses her problem solving, working in small teams, using visualizations and remote sensor data, perhaps from the Great Barrier Reef. She's connected to her friends at school and out of school by her mobile technologies, working to access both her class assignments, her supplemental materials, wherever she happens to be. She and her friends collaborate and explore virtual environments with multisensory feedback and relate content back to their work in a variety of media. Her learning experiences are collected together in perhaps a rich media notebook in which she tracks her progress through lessons, makes notes on what to follow up on, and alerts her parents to areas where they can help and about which they should pay particular attention. She writes about her experiences and reflects on her assignments as well as her personal thoughts, some of which she protects for her eyes only, and others she makes selectively available to friends. Her electronic life book is a longitudinal record of her thoughts and experiences of her digital and physical world interactions. She is the student that's graduating and coming to our institutions in a year or two. So imagine she's been accepted at your school and she's walking into the learning environment on your campus. This is the context with which she's going to experience the tertiary education that she and we are providing to her. And unfortunately, much of that still today is based on an extraordinary didactic method. So this is a courtesy of John C. Brown, who allowed me to use the slides of his. The Cartesian learning environment: I teach, you learn. If you don't, it's your problem, not mine. And the goal is cultivating nice, neat, disciplinary rows of knowledge that stay with you, but of course are only partly related to me. Now, John C. Brown has been one of the harbingers of a change in the way in which we envision this kind of environment, moving from what he calls a movement from content to practice. What he argues, and I think he's right, is that we have focused for the last 100 and some odd years on the process of learning about content, about explicit knowledge. And yet, being a professional is much more than that. It's about learning to be that profession. It's about the tacit knowledge that interacts with that content. And the student, as they become more and more deeply engaged as a professional, moves from content when they need it to the actual practice of the discipline. And then when they need more content and explicit knowledge, they grab it and they cycle back again. It's that virtuous cycle, as he calls it, that we really need to try to foster in the learning engagement that our students are going through. And in the process, unleashing this productive inquiry. Stephen Downes describes it slightly differently. He notes that learning a discipline of study is a total state, not a collection of specific states. It's obtained through an immersion in an environment rather than the acquisition of particular entities. It's expressed functionally. Can you perform as a geographer rather than cognitively? Can you state geographic facts or do geography tasks? So we're moving, in a sense, from this notion of a funneling of specific, explicit content into our students' heads to one that is involved in building a social network of individuals who are together constructing this information and this knowledge for their own understanding and contribution to being the professional of whatever discipline they're studying. So, you all know Sir Ken Robinson. This was a TED Talk that's gone around for several years, but there's a piece of it which I think is particularly relevant.
I believe our only hope for the future is to adopt a new conception of human ecology, one in which we start to reconstitute our conception of the richness of human capacity. Our education system has mined our minds in the way that we've strip mined the earth for a particular commodity, and for the future it won't serve us. We have to rethink the fundamental principles on which we're educating our children. There was a wonderful quote by Jonas Salk who said, if all the insects were to disappear from the earth, within 50 years all life on earth would end. If all human beings disappeared from the earth, within 50 years all forms of life would flourish. And he's right. What TED celebrates is the gift of the human imagination. We have to be careful now that we use this gift wisely and that we avert some of the scenarios that we've talked about. And the only way we'll do it is by seeing our creative capacities for the richness they are and seeing our children for the hope that they are. And our task is to educate their whole being so they can face this future. By the way, we may not see this future, but they will. And our job is to help them make something of it.
So what are the fundamental questions that we have to ask in this process, and that the technologies that we are using on campus need to help us with? One of these questions is, how do we make formal learning environments more like informal learning and professional interaction? A second is, how do we make this classroom learning more like participatory culture? The culture of creativity that we engage in as professionals, and which students and individuals in general outside of academia engage in making meaning and creating collaborations around things that they care about. What is the form of this VLE or the LMS 3.0? And I would suggest that it's less about code and costs, or, frankly, less about proprietary versus open source, and more about extracting the data and information and insight from the transactional data that is captured in the process of using the VLE and interactions with content and learning. So, in some sense, you can think of it as, what's the Aussie for learning analytics? What is it that actually allows us to capture what's going on? And I think we've heard in several days, several parts of today, and those of you that were here yesterday, activities that Blackboard is engaging in which are actually helping us capture the things that otherwise we might be missing. So the features of that participatory culture that are critical are that it has low barriers to entry. It provides strong support for sharing one's contributions. It supports informal mentorship from experienced to novice. The members in it feel a sense of connection to one another. Students feel a sense of ownership in what's being created. And there's a strong collective sense that something is at stake in what they're doing. So how do we go about designing this kind of experience? And in what ways do we have to rethink our pedagogical and assessment practices and tools to make that kind of a learning an effective environment? And finally, what are the new dimensions of learning that demand our attention? Well, there's some places we can turn to for guidelines here. One is something called the Visible Knowledge Project. Randy Bass from Georgetown University and several others led a research project that concluded last year and published a number of findings about what is it about the collaborative process and social engagement that make creation of knowledge more